Hello and welcome to another playthrough video. This time I'm going out to sea with Dreadnought, uh, SPI game from 1975. Taking a look at this game, was one I played many years ago. Got it, well, soon after it came out. I want to say 19... Oh, it was around 1980 or so. I'm thinking here, 79, 80, 78, 79, 80. I can't remember exactly. Played the heck out of it back then, warts and all, and had a good time with it. It's one that's a kind of a shoot 'em up. Um, not a lot of detail. SPI type of games where you could put on the table and play it fairly quickly. You probably spent a couple hours on it, particularly the historical scenarios, or you could get in the campaign, which could span multiple weekends and such as a kid. So this was a great game. Liked it. As I said, it did have some warts with the rules that I am actually going to correct over here. We had, back in the day when we played this, we had made some notes on here, which I'll talk about later, about making this better, which it did, and I've kind of, incorporated that in a little bit more with the Vassal module that I've got here, and I will probably write this up at some point, or write them up at some point. Some of them are already documented. There's a lot of good literature out on Board Game Geek about this game, as well as other resources that you can find, more information about SPI games. So let me get started with this. Let me just give you an introduction if you've never seen this before. It's a naval game. We're out at sea. This is actually tactical naval combat between capital ships, primarily. Your dreadnought classes and the big ships from World War I as well as World War II, where you get Bismarck and King George V and the Missouri and so forth and so on. Primarily combat between those types of ships. And there's a number of scenarios on this that I mentioned that you can play. The first one I'm going to play is actually the first one, Dogger Bank, from the World War I era scenarios, which is kind of interesting. And I will be shooting video on that and show you that as well. But it goes all the way from 1906, I think they say in the title, all the way up through 1945. So you can get into the World War II battles and some of the larger ships with that as well. Then, as I said, there is a campaign module which kind of is hypothetical to some degree, where you take, you have two sides playing against each other, and there's a series of hypothetical games that you play out. Within them, you can, damage ships, sink ships, so forth and so on, and then you can build more, and then basically whoever has the most campaign points at the end, wins. So I'm super simplifying it, but that's extremely fun as well, because you can get into some different style games of naval bombardment and convoy duty and so forth and so on within there as well. So that's kind of interesting. I'm going to take a look at this mainly from the standpoint of the historical modules that we'll go through, and I'll show you here as well. But let me just kind of introduce the game, because the rules are fairly simple. It's a very short rule set, which is one nice thing. I mean, take a look at some naval games, and they get upwards to, can get upwards to 30, 40, whatever pages or more. This, when I look at the rules here, we're looking at 10 pages of basic, advanced, and the campaign setup within there. So you're dealing with like 10 pages of rules. Very simple, and I'll kind of describe them here in a moment here. As I said, there are a few little typical SPI things that are either glossed over or not quite fleshed out the way they should be. But I think they can be very easily overcome, and you'll see my changes that overcome this to make it a fun game and more realistic to fight within here. So let's get started. Let me show you what this is all about. So anyways, naval game. Here's our map. Pretty basic. It's just the ocean. There's actually four maps to the physical game. There's A, B, C, which all lined up on top, and then below is D, E, and F, which all lined up. And one of the nice things when you're playing the campaign game is that these things were movable. You could take one of these squares and shift it around very easily, or two of them, or three of them, whatever number you needed, and shift them without shifting the whole map. Different than other naval games that had maps on them. I'm thinking, going back into the Age of Sail period with Wooden Ships and Iron Men, where you just had kind of the two maps, and it was really kind of difficult shifting stuff around. This, you can actually shift the boards around and kind of tile them together the way you need them, so that you can play. They do have compasses on them. You got north, south, and then northwest, northeast, southwest, southeast in terms of your directions. That'll come into play a little bit later with this. So that's basically the map. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple within there. I've added one little feature here as part of the module. There's a turn chit up here, which allows you to flip the turns, increase it to 2 or decrease it back to 1, whichever way you want. Just gives a turn marker. There was no turn marker within here. I've kind of gotten into heavily modifying the Vassal on this, and you'll see some of the stuff that I've done on here, just because it was very basic. It was missing a few things here and there. It was good in terms of what it did, but it was just missing things, and I kind of rearranged it a little bit. One thing it was missing was a single dice. You can see now there's a single dice and a double dice. Mainly we'll be using the double dice, but the single dice comes into play every once in a while. Okay, so next, moving on to the heart of the game, the counters, the ship counters. So I'm going to move on, the Dreadnought here. I'm going to zoom in on it so I can talk to you about it. Now, these are the typical counters of, the SPI Avalon Hill days. You basically have that Z format. Up here we have the 13 represents the attack strength, basically the weight of the broadside out there. 10 is the range, how far along this can shoot. 4 is the armor. That comes into play when we talk about defense from the attacks. And then the last number over here, the 5, is a speed. 5, basically 5 hexes in one turn. Okay. Then we have BR for British. Its unique number 011, and then of course its name Dreadnought, and then of course the little ship model here on here. Typical SPI games, monochrome. I call it monochrome. It's not truly monochrome, but limited palette of coloring to this and images on here, which works. I mean, it shows the ship, it shows the strengths and what you need to play the game. It doesn't have a lot of the detail that modern counters have on here as well. And you basically have all of them on here, and you can see within the Vassal module there's Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Russia, Spain, and the US. And then we've got Argentina, Austria, and Brazil. You can fight some South American battles down here as well. We did a campaign with that. That was kind of fun. It was a smaller one, kind of quick and easy to play within there. So that is our game pieces. That's our capital ship game pieces. We also have, let me see if I can find them here. We have what they call screening forces. These are your lesser ships, your cruisers and your destroyers that took part, within the battles. So you can see here, this one is a set of heavy cruisers, and then we've got some, I think, there's some light cruisers on here. Those are CLs, if I can find them, CAs. They're someplace here. I'll find them here eventually. But then we've got destroyers. So you can see here's screens of destroyers. Now these are a little bit different. Same Z mode. You got attack, range, defense, or I should say armor, and then movement over there. It represents 2 cruisers on here. Destroyers represent 5 destroyers in the group. And the destroyers have one other thing here. You see it says 1-1 T. That means they have torpedoes, and that's this over here, that they can actually fire torpedoes that will track over and eventually potentially hit the target and do some damage over there as well. So those are the basic ships that we're maneuvering with. These are what they call screening units, lighter units, and then you have the capital ships. They're named units over here that we'll be working with. I've also added in the Vassal module, just for ease of maintenance, this little number over here. That represents its damage control, and we'll talk about that a little bit later here. It's how much damage they can fix during the course of the battle. Okay, so those are the units on here as well. And now, next thing I want to talk with you about is give you an idea of what the sequence of play is. So here is a chart. This is one thing I've added to the Vassal here, is the sequence of play. Very simple sequence of play. There's really just one, this says 6, but it really can be broken down into 1, 2, 3, 4 phases. There's a visibility determination. This defines how far ships can see each other. Then we have a fire phase, which is broken down into 1, a plotting phase, an execution, and then 2, is execution phase. Now, this is where we get into the game and how it's defined in terms of its mechanics, because it is a simultaneous game, typical SPI, simultaneous movement, and it is plotting. It does require plotting of fire and movement. So from the standpoint of solo play, it makes it a little bit difficult, but with me at this point, playing solo is not a big deal. I can random. I have actions that I want to do with both of them, and I'm going to stick to those actions, and I'm not going to say, oh, I know that Germans are going to do this, so the British can do that, and so forth. I make up my mind that there's going to be actions, and that's what we're going to stick with when we're doing it. So that makes it a little bit easier. And I do like the plotting, because there's a couple things that I've put in here that makes it a little bit easier as well. And it can lead to a few interesting surprises, when you're playing it there as well. Now, on the opposite hand, from a truly solo perspective, I know there is a couple of posts out there about some solo methods for, eliminating the need to plot this, whether it goes through initiative and some sort of dice rolls or chip pull or whatever it is. There's a number of them I've seen out there for this that you can use, and feel free to experiment with it. This is the one thing I can say about this is a small enough, simple enough game that you can look at it and tweak it enough, but it gives you the basics. It gives you the ships. It gives you the ocean, and it gives you the scenarios that are going to roughly portray the battle in a simplistic form, without getting into heavy details of armor types and vertical penetration versus horizontal penetration and angle of attacks and all that kind of fun stuff. All that's gone. It's all encapsulated into a much simpler, kind of more interesting combat flow within here as well, which we'll see here in a little bit. But you basically have the visibility, you have the plotting and the execution of the fire, both simultaneously. So any type of hits or damage is applied after the fire. Then you have your movement, and you also have your torpedoes moving in here, which is also simultaneous, which is interesting, because you do need, for torpedoes to be effective, you do need to think about where your ships are and how you want to get your destroyers in. But at the same time, you don't want to do it on a undamaged capital ship, because between their primary and their secondary armaments, it's probably going to wipe them out the first time they get close. So you got to be careful about it, but it does get interesting, because those torpedoes can be pretty devastating, because they basically apply damage immediately. There's no hitting or anything like that. There's no duds and things like that you might get in other games and such like that. But there is basically, you're going to roll for damage on them, and you may get it, you may not on there as well. So, kind of interesting. Then finally you have damage control, which allows you to pull off damage. Again, this is based upon a dice roll, and you have a certain amount of damage control that you can do. Going back to my counters here for a minute, that's why I've got this little number over here to keep an eye on how much damage control has been done, because the amount of damage control you can do is equal to the defense value that you have. So with a Dreadnought, it's only got 4. So that means it can only successfully repair 4 damage hits. After that, no more. It just accumulates damage until it's either wrecked or sunk. So it does become a little bit of a numbers game and a little bit of, management in terms of, do I repair this now? Do I repair my speed before I repair my guns? And things like that, which is kind of interesting there as well. Okay, so that's kind of the basics of the turn sequence and what's going to go on here. In terms of the games themselves, let me close this out. There's a number of scenarios. One of them they're going to play is called Dogger Bank. Let me open that up, and you can see. Let's close this here. Close game, and you can see that a little bit better. Oh, I should point out here something else in the background. I've also created myself some Google Sheets for Dogger Bank, and you can see here that this is the plots that you have over here. There's basically a move and a fire. You have your ships up here, and you basically put in what you're going to do in terms of firing. I'm going to fire, Lion's going to fire on the Blucher, or Blucher's going to fire on the Lion. Movement is just with the directions. So I'm going to go north, 4 hexes, or I'm going to turn northeast for 2 hexes, and then go north for 4 hexes, whatever it may be. Very simple on there. There is some formations that we can do, and I'll talk about that here in a little bit. But this is basically it, and this is actually Dogger Bank, and this is a 12-turn scenario, as you can see over here. And I've got these here that I lay out to to make this happen. So that's the plotting there. Let's get back to this, and I want to file historical scenario, Dogger Bank, starting the log file, new. So let's go over and I'll show you what this scenario looks like. Let's actually move this down here a little bit so I can fit everything on one screen, hopefully. Here we go, and let's try again. Yep, there we go. So this is the setup for Dogger Bank. We have a number of ships over here for the British. It's all battle cruisers, because historically this was a chase between Beatty's battle cruisers in the First World War from Britain, chasing after, I can't remember the commander now off the top of my head, chasing after the Germans after they raided the English coast. So they're dashing back for Germany, and Beatty's trying to catch up with them over here and trying to knock them out and punish them for attacking England. So we have a number of ships over here. We've got the Tiger, the Lion, and the Prince Royal. Lion was Beatty's flagship during this, and then you have the New Zealand and the Indomitable over here. And then for the Germans, we have a number of them. We have the Blucher, as I mentioned before. We have the Molter, the Seydlitz, and the Derflieger. All right, come on. Highlight back up. There we go. Those are the 4 main battleships for the Germans. And they're trying to get away from the British over there. We also have some screening units here. They've got some destroyers and light cruisers here and here. And then British also has likewise a number of destroyers escorting the battle cruisers, as well as some light cruisers in for the chase. Now, with this, movement is pretty straightforward. Like I said, it's plotted, but it's pretty straightforward. You have a movement factor, and that's as far as you can go. Each hex is 1 point. and you move along. Now, one thing that's interesting about this is that you can create formations. So in this case, we can have a formation here with these two groups, which basically allows them to travel in the same direction and turn together, and just basically keep a battle group together over there. And you have, once you've grouped them together like that, what they can do is either they can move in column or they can move in line abreast, like they're doing right here. They can turn together. So in other words, if they're plotted to move 2 hexes and then turn to the northeast, they would move forward 2 hexes and then turn to the northeast. Same thing with them. They would move 2 hexes and turn to the northeast, and they'd all be considered in the formation to make that turn. Nothing real hard and fast or strict about it. It just allows for easier plotting and easier management of your larger forces within there. When it comes to the ships themselves and their movement, straight ahead movement's the simplest. They just move however far they want. Now they can only move either 100% more or 100% less of what they're moving at. Meaning that if these ships here were moving at a factor of 6, let's say, which is their, in this case, be the maximum speed, or let's say 3. Let's back up a second and say they're moving at 3 for the last turn. In the next turn, they could continue to move 3 hexes, or they could accelerate all the way to 6 hexes. In other words, 100% more than what they're at. So they could go to 6 hexes. Now you can see the New Zealand over here has a movement of 7. They couldn't go to 7. They'd have to stay at 6. Not because they're in formation, but because they were at 3. They can only go 50% more, which is 6. Same thing when they reduce. So they can only go, half of their speed, which is basically 3. So half of 3 rounded down is going to be 1.5 rounded down is 1. So they'll only move. They could slow down to 1 hex. So they have to move a minimum of 1 hex if they were moving 3, and then they could stop in the turn following that. They could come to a full stop. If they were moving at 6 and they wanted to reduce, they'd have to reduce to 3, and then to reduce to 1, and then finally stop. So it kind of mimics the braking effects within the ocean. These ships do not stop on a dime. They take time to stop because you've got to basically just turn off the engine and stop, let it coast to a stop. So that kind of mirrors that and mimics that there as well. The other thing that's interesting too, and this is where I know people have gotten tripped up when they've played it before, is in terms of the turning and movement. With these ships, when they're moving, they can turn twice within a turn. But that's even more restrictive because the first turn has to occur in the hex they're in. So in other words, if we're moving these guys, they could actually turn like that on their first hex. That's their first turn. Then, let's say they were moving 6 hexes. Then they could move 1 hex, 2 hex, 3 hexes. Or they could move 1 hex and then turn again. Or they could turn in the 2nd hex or turn in the 3rd hex. Anywhere up to half of their movement, they're able to turn. And then they can complete the rest of their move. So in other words, they can make 1 turn here to turn this way. Then in any other hex for the first 3, because they're moving at 6, they could turn and go in another direction. Okay, and that's it. That's all they can do for turning. Now they would have to continue the next 3, 1, 2, 3, like that to make 6. Or bringing this all back and getting rid of the movements, they could do this. They could go, oops, wrong way. This one. They could turn this way. They could go 1, and then they could turn again, but that's all their turns. But now they go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. And what this is trying to simulate, and this is where it gets a little wonky and a little simplistic, is, you know, just how hard it is to turn one of these big battleships out at sea. Now you may say, well, you just made 2 turns, you know, right within, you know, 2 hexes. That doesn't seem too bad. And it's not. I will 100% agree with you. And this is where it gets a little bit simplistic. But the point that kind of counters that or offsets that is the fact that they turn, after they turn, they've got to go straight like this. They can't make any more turns. So it kind of shows that they are making some sort of turn. It is a wide turn. They may not have taken an exact course, but for simplicity's sake and not getting into turning radiuses of, you know, each individual ship, you know, this is the way it is. Keeps it fairly simple. But it does throw people off with that because they forget how the movement works. So that's a little bit about the movement. Let me move that back on there. Okay. The next thing and last thing I just want to talk about and show you, because this is where I found a lot of the issues where I've corrected things, is in the combat piece of it. I like the combat because it's very simplistic, but if you think about it, it can be very realistic. But there was a few rule definitions that were either vague or just completely reversed, or they had it incorrect. So let me go through first and explain how combat works. So, of course, it's firing at another ship. So if I said I want the Tiger here, these guys here, to fire at the Defleeger over here, you know, and they're at a range of, I think it's 9. Yeah, it's 9. You know, they could do that, okay? They could do that. They could fire their 18 firepower at them over here. Now, how do you do it? Well, we go to our charts, back to our charts, and we have this thing, this concept of damage points. And what this is, let's move this over so I can show this a little bit better. Here we go. Keep that off for a minute. What this is this is your attack strength. So take the 18 and find the column that it fits into. So 16 to 20 is where 18 is located. Then we're going to roll a dice, 2 dice, and we're going to get a number in here. All right, and that is going to give us our damage. This is how much damage it scores on a particular target. So think of this as the weight of the broadside or the weight of the shell fire from the capital ship to the target. You see that it's got a range from 0 all the way up to, you know, a higher number. One of the issues I have with this, and it should probably be normalized, is it's not really fits to a 2d6 bell curve. You can see it's rather linear in terms of its numbers here. So, you know, your 7s here, which is going to be your higher probability of getting something, is going to wind up in here. And, you know, your lower numbers are going to be 0, and your higher numbers are going to be, you know, your lower numbers are going to be misses, higher numbers are going to be extreme damage on there as well. It should be normalized, but it still works. It still works. But anyway, so you get the factor. You know, say I rolled a 7 on here, I get 6 firepower, or 6 damage points on the ship. Now, also, there are dice rolls and modifiers for that attack strength, and that's what I'm going to bring over here to show you here as well. And these are the things that I have changed heavily, both when I played a number of years ago, back in the 1980s, as well as recently here. These are the things that I've changed. So you have some modifications here for the attack strength modification. First off, if a ship is firing through the bow or stern, its attack strength is cut in half. So if, in this case, the Tiger is firing through its bow or stern, because that's defined as the 60-degree angle that it's pointing to right here. So it is firing through its bow, so it's cut in half. And if you think about it, this is logical, because in the structure of a battleship, you had turrets in the front, you had turrets in the back. Your full weight was in a broadside, not necessarily firing forward forward through the bow or aft through the stern on the ship. So that's where it's cut in half. Now in the rules as they're written, that is not the case. They actually had a dice roll modifier for this, which I thought was not good. And this half was done for something else, which I'll touch upon here with the DRMs. I basically flipped that because this made much more sense with that as well. Second thing I changed is the secondary batteries. The capital ships have secondary batteries. They're 5-inch guns used for close defense against screening units such as light cruisers and destroyers trying to attack close. That basically just had a damage effect on there, where in this case I changed that to fall into the same structure, except the attack strength for secondary batteries is 1/4 of what the attack strength is. So in the case of Tiger, it's 18. Quarter of that, again rounded down, is going to be 4. So their batteries are 4 against the screening ships. That will be your destroyers. That will be these guys and your light cruisers and heavy cruisers over here as well. And I think that fits in well because a 4 winds up on the 0 to 5 table. And again, most of the time it's going to be hitting with zeros or very low values, which line up with what the smaller ships' armor values are within there. Okay. And then DRMs, I adjusted here as well. One of them being fired upon. This is the one that I switched with the half firepower. So instead of being half firepower for being fired upon, it's actually -2 for being fired upon. What that means is if you're being fired upon, there's a -2 dice roll on here. So immediately your dice roll is going to go down 2. So if I roll a 7, it's going to go down to a 5. And then I've got other modifiers on here that I've added as well for each ship firing on the same target ship. Now this is an accumulating one where after the first ship fires, there's going to be a -1 for the next ship, a -2 for the second ship, a -3 for the third ship. So if multiple ships are firing on them, first ship gets their salvo in, but then it starts getting tougher because you've got splashes in the water and damage and things like that, which makes it tougher for them to fire on. And then another big one they've added is the firing ship has not yet scored damage on a target ship. This is a big one that I use for ranging. So for instance, if the Tiger was firing at the Deflieger and it hadn't scored any damage before, it would get a -1 on its dice roll. That's going to shift these down significantly on here. And the chance that a significant hit's going to be on here is going to be less until they score any damage. And that could be just a 2. If they score a 2 damage on them, then the next time they basically have remove the -1. And this is for targeting because it's tough to get that first initial shot on the ships. I don't care if you're a battleship or a destroyer or anybody, it's tough to get the first shot at this time on target. So this is kind of mirroring that. So there's a -1 for not getting any damage on the ships. And you lose that as well if you don't continue to hit your target with damage. In other words, if you score zeros like this all the time, it's going to you're back to square one. You've got to retarget. Okay, so these are the things that I've added in here. And of course, there was a range effect on here, which as you get closer, you can double or triple. If you get longer than certain ranges, you're halved. Screening units also only go against capital ships from 1 to 3 range, even though they might have more ranges on there. Okay, so that basically explains, calculating your damage points based upon the attack. Now, once you've got the damage points, the next thing you do is compare them to the defense factor of your ship. So, if the Tiger was firing on him and they've got a 6, let's say, or a 4 or something like that on the Deflieger, you look at the defense, their armor defense is a 10. Okay, so it's 4 attack, 10 defense. Now you take a ratio of that, and that ratio is used for your combat results over here. So 4 against 10, in my example, basically is a 1 to 3, if I do the numbers right, round down, which is not even on the chart, which automatic miss. The armor basically bounces off the armor. But if they scored, let's say, a 10 versus a 10 armor, that would mean a 1-to-1 combat result. And that, then what we do is actually roll on this chart and figure out what damage we've got. Either the dot representing no damage, or we have a 1G, 1S, 2G, 2S. There's basically two types of damage that you can have. You can have gunnery damage, and you can have what do you call it? Steaming damage. That's what I call it with the S. They call it something else, but it's basically your movement on there. So 1G means you suffered 1 gunnery hit. 1S means 1 movement hit. And what those translate in? Basically, 1G hit is it halves your armor, or excuse me, halves your attack strength. A 1S halves your movement. So if you were 6 movement points, you could only move 3 movement points the next time you move. 1G would only make it, half of your strength. So if the Tiger was hit with 1G, it would only be able to fire with 9 attack strength. Okay, that's what the 1G and everything. Once you hit 2G or 2S, that means you either lose all your gunnery or you're dead in the water, or both, because you basically can be hit with both of those, as you can see as this goes on. And the damage is accumulating for both sides. 1G with another G hit becomes 2G. 1S with another S makes it 2S, and so forth. All the way up to 2G, 2S, which at that point you're wrecked, basically dead in the water, and you're done with. Then the last thing you have is the E, which you can see down here, which may sink the ship. You roll again. If it comes up 7 or 11, then you're sunk. If it doesn't, then you just take a 2G, 1S damage. Okay. And then there's a few other things here for screening units. In terms of that, those were added with some special rules that were in the Move magazine back in its day. And for the screening units over there, make them a little bit more realistic. And basically that's it. That's the combat, and that's the adjustments I've made. So if you've played this before, you can see how this adjusts. I find this works very well. I've been play testing this quite a bit with some of these changes and tweaking a little bit more from my 40-year-old notes from when we played this last, and updating things on there as well. And it plays really well, but it is kind of a tactical game where you're going to get into it quick, you're going to get into the fighting quick, and you're just going to start blasting at each other and knocking out. This is not going to be a kind of a operational kind of campaign where you're trying to outmaneuver the units. Obviously you're going to have maneuvering in here, but there's no hidden stuff or anything like that other than the plotting and things like that. You are mainly there to just blast away at each other, trying to sink each other or deny them getting off the board or something like that within there. But it is an awful lot of fun, and it can be played in relatively quick time. Once you get going with this and you just understand all the bits and pieces from this, like I said, 10 pages of rules, can't beat that. It really moves along quite quickly, and definitely face to face, a couple people can play in a couple hours, blasting away at each other on here as it goes. So that's my kind of introduction to the game, and I hope you. Whoops, I got the wrong one here. There we go. Hope you liked this and enjoy this. I will be doing a playthrough on this. I've got another set of videos coming out with this particular scenario, just to have fun with and kind of go from there. So hopefully you enjoy this, and stay tuned for the next ones. Thanks for watching.